LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 2nd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Happy Groundhog's Day, one of my favorite movies of all time. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing here. Tonight, I have clips showing, talking basically about the main topic, which is the 51 Republican senators who voted for no witnesses, no documents in Trump's impeachment trial this week. The first time in American history that there's been an impeachment trial in the Senate with no witnesses called. And you'll see that satirized by Alec Baldwin on Saturday Night Live in their fantasy trial where Alec Baldwin as Donald Trump actually testifies, and I'll show you that in a moment as one of the 10 best, most newsworthy clips I've picked out. The rest are all from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. And by the way, I watched every single second of Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate to give me the background to make my commentary this week. And also, if you want to follow along on my clip list for my 10 clips, there's a link down in the video description where you can read my sometimes cryptic notes. And also the source of all my clips is down there, including the free Saturday Night Live YouTube channel that has the cold open clip I'm going to show in a minute. But I just wanted to briefly say that my topic this week, Senate covers for Trump, I'm reiterating the point I've been making all the way since New Year's when I said this is Trump 2020, the year, or 2020, happy 2020, the year that Trump loses. That was because I think that this whole impeachment thing has been a trap for Republicans to too quickly exonerate him. And if you look down in the video description, this has been in my topic description for all of 2020, saying, are Republicans falling into a trap if they exonerate Trump too quickly in the Senate before further facts come out, making Trump's guilt even clearer? Trump could lose in the courts for, in terms of what he has to turn over, and in public opinion in 2020, even if he wins in the Senate, even if he gets exonerated this week. So that's the main topic I'm covering. Also, I'll briefly discuss coverage of the Iowa caucuses coming up tomorrow and the State of the Union address on Tuesday that comes before the vote on removal or acquittal of Donald Trump on Wednesday. But first, as promised, I want to show the Saturday Night Live cold open from last night where they had this fantasy trial of Donald Trump with Alec Baldwin showing what it would be like if we could have gotten testimony from Donald Trump in his trial. And I will talk about all of that a little more with you after we watch. This is a little over a minute of the cold open. Like I said, there's a link down in the video description where you can watch the whole thing yourself after we watch it together over here.
Ladies and gentlemen of this government place, what I've learned from this trial is that clearly nothing I do or say has any consequence, so I'd like to come clean about everything. The call with the Ukraine wasn't perfect, it was illegal, and frankly, it was about time. Also, I watch CNN all the time, and it's awesome. I hate the following states: Iowa, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arkansas, and West Virginia. West Carolina, I'm sorry. I cheat all the time at golf, taxes, wives, elections, and bathroom scales. I'm not 239 pounds, I'm 475 pounds. I don't really need this walker either, although it does help me be lazier, which I like. What else? Oh, I cut the funding to the CDC, so this Wang Chung virus is really going to be bad. But this trial has been incredible because I now have a best friend. Mitch McConnell, get in here, Mitch. He's a ride or die bitch. And we're going to be linked forever, right, Mitch?
And that last point there, that last joke, I mean, there was a bunch of good jokes. You notice he talked about the Wang Chung virus, which was not the coronavirus, which had a significant effect on the U.S. stock market on Friday, in addition to the increasing number of deaths and all the problems in China. But I mentioned the stock market because I saw all this coverage of how this could be the thing that actually starts the recession that has been long awaited, and that could actually affect the election. But you notice there that was the Wang Chung virus joke, but the main point of the end of that clip, and it goes on, you'll see Beck Bennett there playing Mitch McConnell, like wondering if he should have tied himself forever to Donald Trump like Trump was claiming, or Alec Baldwin as Trump was claiming. And that's the point I'm making with my whole trap for the Republicans, that may be the whole point of impeachment. And I'll show you an Adam Schiff clip coming up. That's clip number 7 if you're following along on the clip list, where Adam Schiff says that we need to hold the Republican Senate accountable. In fact, I think it's possible that this whole Trump impeachment, even though it's most likely that it won't lead to the removal of Donald Trump on Wednesday, that would be a very strange outcome, a very I mean, I can't even imagine the facts in the next few days that would lead to the removal. I mean, he'd have to, well, maybe he goes on like a violent rampage at the State of the Union on Tuesday, and so they remove him on Wednesday. I mean, what other facts? And he actually shoots someone on Fifth Avenue. Would that be? Oh, I don't know. But that's not going to happen. But the point is that now the Senate Republicans have tied their own fate to the innocence of Donald Trump. And as more and more facts come out, and you'll see some discussion of that later, including by Adam Schiff in clip number 7, where the Senate Republicans are going to be tied to Trump. And maybe this whole scandal will make it so that people don't vote for Trump and he loses the election. But it also could mean that the Republicans lose the Senate. Or maybe there'll be this weird outcome where Trump wins, but he loses the Senate. So it's like an entirely Democratic Congress. And that would be like a really weird political situation that maybe I'll talk about a little more after we watch some of the news clips. But I want to show you 4 different news summaries. The one news summary I'm not going to show you is from CBS News' Face the Nation, where they decided to spend their news summary totally covering the coronavirus. And as I talked about, I don't know, is that going to be maybe... Sometimes I think people are overreacting to it. Sometimes I think people are underreacting to it. I think maybe the stock market overreacted, and that would mean it's a good buying opportunity, but I can't give any stock buying advice. But it could be an underreaction, and maybe CBS News' Face the Nation is correct to be covering the coronavirus as the biggest story. But all the other news summaries, I think they had all their own biases to show. You know, I often talk about how Fox News has a partisan political bias, while the other news programs have a bias for sensationalism, for superficiality, for corporate news bias, where they actually favor corporate interests against, the interest of the workers or whatever. But you'll see that there's this bias I've talked about a lot of times, where when they have like an exclusive guest, or I think this is more like the whole thing that, what's most important about real estate? Location, location, location. Well, all of the news programs or the news summaries I'm going to show you, except for Fox News, are from Iowa. So I think they overly focus on the Iowa caucuses, which are happening tomorrow. And I think sometimes there's too much focus on the results of Iowa, because the number of delegates you get in Iowa is really that important. But because of the focus on Iowa, since Jimmy Carter used Iowa to catapult him to the presidency, it gives some sort of momentum to the winner of Iowa. Who knows what's going to happen? But you'll see There is a lot of focus on Iowa from the news programs that are coming to you from Iowa. And then Fox News Sunday has too much focus on the Super Bowl. I'm actually doing this live stream broadcast during halftime at this point. Last time I looked, it was like 10-10 between the 49ers and Kansas City Chiefs. I'm not a big sports fan, but it seems like San Francisco versus Kansas City is some sort of metaphor for the Democrats versus the Republicans in all of our political battles. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm finally going to get to the first of the news summaries from Meet the Press, where, like I said, maybe too much of a focus on Iowa because Pete Buttigieg was on the show, and you'll see Chuck Todd is in Iowa, but they do talk about impeachment a little bit at least, and the impeachment trial in the clip I will discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning from Des Moines, Iowa, where tomorrow night, caucus night, Democratic voters will finally get their first say on who they want facing off against President Trump in November. We're back again at the West End Architectural Salvage, a coffee shop that also sells all kinds of great custom and vintage furniture. The other big story is in Washington, where Senate Republicans voted to block new witnesses in President Trump's impeachment trial, clearing the way for the president's all but certain acquittal on Wednesday. Both parties will plan to leverage impeachment in November, the president insisting he's been exonerated, Democrats arguing the witness-free trial was a sham. The turning point came Friday night with Tennessee's Lamar Alexander's no vote, effectively ending the Democrats' hope of introducing new evidence or new witnesses like John Bolton. You'll see my exclusive interview with Senator Alexander in a few minutes. Here in Iowa, Democratic candidates have been making their last-minute pitches to Iowans leading up to what is really opening day of the 2020 presidential campaign. Normally, this morning, we'd have the results of the highly anticipated Des Moines Register poll, but its scheduled release last night was canceled because of problems with its methodology. Welcome to 2020. Meanwhile, our new NBC News Wall Street Journal national poll shows the top 4 Democrats all leading President Trump, with Joe Biden holding the largest advantage at 6 points. But first, the candidates need to get past each other, starting right here in Iowa.
All those who think our campaign is the strongest to beat Trump, raise your hand.
With the caucuses just hours away, the candidates are making their closing arguments.
We have one job, and that is just to go out electorally and defeat Donald Trump.
The Iowa caucus is where we start this path, not just to get rid of Donald Trump. That's a big one. Believe me, after this past week, that is a really big one.
And sharpening their attacks.
I believe at a time like this, the risk we cannot afford to take is to turn to the same Washington mindset.
I've got more than 8,600 votes.
Peanut butter cup.
For months, the opponents of Bernie Sanders have been reluctant to take him on. Now, with his rise in the polls in Iowa, New Hampshire, and now nationally, they are beginning to try.
Then there's Senator Sanders, speaking of goals I think that we all share, but putting it together in a politics that feels too often like it's my way or the highway.
Biden, neck and neck with Sanders at the top of national polls, is downplaying expectations. With a sharp ideological divide between the Sanders-Warren wing of the party and Democrats who want smaller-scale change, moderate Democrats are torn about who to support.
We need somebody that will appeal to broadly to the Democratic Party.
I'm looking for a moderate, somewhere in the middle a little bit. I think Pete fits the bill.
I feel Amy's a fresh face.
This cycle, we have a lot more people who are either truly undecided or at least persuadable in the final hours. They're really struggling with this concept of who is the right person out there to beat President Trump.
The angst is palpable.
It's going to be hard to choose one that will be electable.
Maybe some of the candidates that would appeal to more people on a broad spectrum kind of get shoved to the side just because they aren't saying things that are more outrageous.
And already resentments are threatening to divide the party.
Joe Biden was the nominee.
I would begrudgingly vote for him. I think he has done a lot of things over the years that have been very dishonest.
As long as it's not Trump.
Stuck in Washington, the 4 senators in the race have largely relied on surrogates in the campaign's final weeks.
Bernie, are you there?
I am here, but I would rather be there, to tell you the truth.
As Democrats worry President Trump's almost certain acquittal this week will embolden him.
They want to nullify your ballots, poison our democracy, and overthrow the entire
system of government. That's not happening.
It's going to make him worse than what he is now. He thinks he's going to get by doing everything and anything.
And joining me now is presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg, the former mayor of South Bend.
And Pete Buttigieg almost did the full Ginsburg. He didn't appear on Fox News Sunday, but he was on the other four of the big five corporate Sunday morning news analysis programs. And still, I'm not going to even show you one clip of Pete Buttigieg. Although I saw a poll that showed him like tied almost for first place. It was like 25% of Iowa. This was the CBS News tracker poll of Iowa that showed, I think it was Biden at 25, Sanders at 24, and Buttigieg at 21 with a plus or minus 3% margin of error. So almost tied for first with Biden and Sanders. There are a lot of things that could happen in Iowa. I'm not saying Iowa isn't news, but I'm just saying the focus of the corporate news media on Iowa, because that's where they are on a week when there was all this impeachment trial news, the John Bolton revelations that didn't get a lot of play in the news summaries. And there's going to be a lot of news from Iowa tomorrow night, like more news than usual, because usually Iowa just reports who won the caucuses, but this time they're actually going to they're going to report multiple results, like who people voted for when they first showed up, and even like the second round. I heard someone report the second round, so there'll be like multiple reports from Iowa as to who won which rounds, which will allow different candidates to claim victory in Iowa, which will actually dilute the effect of Iowa. But I thought the NBC News Meet the Press news summary there, they, when they talked about impeachment, they talked about it more in terms of how it affects Iowa and how it affects the election politically, and not so much in terms of the extremely wrongful conduct by Donald Trump that was revealed over and over again, and then even more so by the revelations from John Bolton that were just breaking when I did my live stream last Sunday, and came out in even greater degree over the week. And I can't even believe that the Senate decided not to hear it. But anyway, that's my criticism of the longer NBC News Meet the Press news summary. Now I'm going to show you two much quicker news summaries, like a 45-second and a 1 minute 6-second news summary from ABC and CNN. They both kind of suffer from some of the same problems of concentrating too much on Iowa because they happen to be in Iowa. And I'll talk about them. I'll talk about the ABC news summary from George Stephanopoulos. Where's my clip list? Oh, I dropped it. Which, like I said, it also does this weird, like, reverse day thing where it talks about what's going to happen on Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday. Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday. Wouldn't most people talk about what's going to happen on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? And we're talking about Iowa caucuses, State of the Union speech, and probable acquittal from the Senate for Donald Trump on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But you'll hear it backwards on Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday on ABC over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week, the most consequential week yet of this hyper-political year. Wednesday, the Senate's final votes in the trial of President Trump. Tuesday, the State of the Union, certain to be unlike any we've seen before. Trump, the first president in American history to face voters after impeachment. Monday, the Democrats taking him on face their first voters, the Iowa caucuses that night. And as we come on the air this morning, that race even harder to read thanks to a surprise twist. The premier Iowa poll from the Des Moines Register canceled at the very last minute after a supporter of Mayor Pete Buttigieg reported that in at least one case, Buttigieg was not included in the survey. So let's get right to the mayor. Pete Buttigieg joins us from Des Moines this morning. Mayor, thanks for joining us.
And like I said, Pete Buttigieg did almost the full Ginsburg. That's left over from Monica Lewinsky's attorney. I think, was it Daniel Ginsburg? I think it was Daniel Ginsburg, who appeared on all 5 Sunday shows for the first time in history, I think. I think it was the first, and that's why it's called the full Ginsburg. But Pete Buttigieg was on 4 of the 5 shows. I'm not showing Pete Buttigieg, even though, who knows, he might actually be a big winner in Iowa. And there's 4, maybe 5 people who could come out of Iowa as the big winner or the big loser. Who, many people may have to end their campaigns after Iowa, and then New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina and Super Tuesday on March 3rd that includes California, where I haven't decided whether I'm going to be voting for Bernie Sanders like I did in the primaries back in 2016, or Elizabeth Warren, who I've been kind of leaning towards for most of the primaries, and now I'm starting to, I don't know if I'm going towards Bernie Sanders because has this surge and comeback, and I'm going to wait and see what happens in Iowa and New Hampshire, Nevada and South Carolina, I guess, before I make my final decision. But I will let my viewers know before the March 3rd primary who I've decided to vote for in the California primary, because I know my endorsement will be a very important endorsement that moves many votes. So I will let you know that before March 3rd. But I want to show one more of the actual news summaries before I get to the Fox News biased news summary. This is the CNN State of the Union news summary with Jake Tapper, where he talks about how we are finally going to get actual voters. That's our, Jake Tapper always says, what's the State of the Union this week? And you would think this, since the name of his show is State of the Union, and the upcoming week actually includes the President's State of the Union speech, but you would think he would mention that, but I don't. Oh, he does actually mention it when he talks about how we're ready to hear from actual voters, and then he talks about Iowa and the State of the Union and the acquittal, and then Pete Buttigieg, because he has a Pete Buttigieg interview just like all the other news shows except for Fox News Sunday, which I will talk about a little more after we watch the CNN State of the Union brief 1-minute news summary this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in beautiful Des Moines, Iowa, where the State of our Union is ready to hear from actual voters through actual voting. We join you this morning from the campus of Drake University in Des Moines, just one day before Iowa Democrats kick off the 2020 presidential election in a contest that will help determine who faces President Trump this fall. The Iowa caucuses are just the first major political event in a hugely consequential week. In Washington, the president is set to be acquitted by the Senate on those 2 articles of impeachment. That's on Wednesday, but not before the president delivers his State of the Union address the day before, Tuesday, with several lawmakers who hope to unseat him in the audience. Beating President Trump this November has become the all-consuming focus of Democratic primary voters, but they disagree on how best to do it. Tomorrow night, Iowans will gather at caucus sites to try to decide, and my first guest today went from a virtual unknown to becoming one of the top Democratic contenders. Former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg and 2020 presidential candidate joins me right now. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
I want to start with impeachment.
So I think I pretty much pre-criticized that clip before I showed it, or talked about what I thought about the way Jake Tapper presented the news of the week in that 1-minute summary. I was reading the live comments along the way, and my live viewers seem to think I'm going to be voting for Bernie Sanders on March 3rd here in California. And actually, that is kind of the most likely outcome, I think, at this point. Although, I'm apparently too old to be voting for Bernie Sanders. People my age are all like big Biden supporters. It's the 18 to 34-year-olds. I'm like a Gen X guy who's, I don't know. No one even cares about my generation. That's why they call it Gen X. But anyway, thanks for those comments down in the live comment section. And I want to show one more news summary. And this isn't just the superficiality and the bias that I talked about that all the rest of the news media has. This is the special partisan political news bias from Fox News that even appears on the supposedly straight news program, Fox News Sunday, with their supposedly straight news anchor, Chris Wallace. Well, they actually have the whole superficiality and other biases of the rest of the news media, where the location bias I was talking about, where all the other news media focused on Iowa because they were actually reporting from Iowa. Well, Fox has the Super Bowl this week, and I actually checked during one of the previous breaks, and it's like a 10-10 tie between Kansas City and San Francisco. So I guess it's like a actual a Super Bowl where it's not a runaway. So it's exciting, and maybe people will be watching it on Fox. But it's not really big news. Sports news isn't, political news, and Fox News Sunday is supposed to be political news, and they focus a lot on the Super Bowl on Fox News Sunday this morning, which I think just shows how they have that same bias as the rest of the news media. But if you listen carefully to their news summary about impeachment, you'll see how Kevin Corke, their reporter, talks about how, this might be brazen partisanship, as the White House says, and then he also ends his news report with a tweet from Donald Trump saying how it's brazen partisanship, the impeachment trial. So you get a little bit of their bias in that. And they also talk about, instead of talking about how the trial was the first impeachment trial in the U.S. Senate ever in history to have no witnesses called, you'll see Kevin Corke says no additional witnesses, which I think shows the Fox News bias. But I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch the 2.5-minute Fox News summary that has the Super Bowl bias and the pro-Trump bias that you can watch with me, and we'll talk about after we watch it together over here.
You are looking at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens, Florida, home to Super Bowl 54 on Fox. Tonight, the San Francisco 49ers play the Kansas City Chiefs here for pro football's biggest prize. And hello again from Fox News. Today in the Fox Sports broadcast booth inside the stadium. We'll have plenty on the big game this hour, including our talk with the Fox NFL Sunday crew you won't want to miss. But we begin with the latest on the Senate impeachment trial and tomorrow's Iowa caucuses, the first contest in the race for the Democratic nomination. The Senate narrowly rejected Democratic demands for witnesses, but pushed off a final vote to acquit President Trump till Wednesday, the day after he addresses Congress on the State of the Union. Let's bring in Kevin Corke, reporting from the president's retreat in Mar-a-Lago, with the latest. Kevin.
Chris, just 3 more days before the White House can finally pierce the cloud cover of what they've considered the brazen partisan process, the single-party impeachment of the President of the United States. Left are Monday's closing arguments, senators' final remarks, and then finally Wednesday at 4 p.m., the vote on the 2 articles of impeachment. And barring a political earthquake, the president's expected acquittal, won by the thinnest of definitions, say defiant Democrats, still reeling from the Senate's 51-49 vote rejecting demands for additional witnesses.
If the president is acquitted with no witnesses, no documents, the acquittal will have no value.
Wedged in between Monday's resumption of activity on the Senate floor and Wednesday's historic vote is the president's State of the Union address Tuesday evening. Themed the Great American Comeback, the president is expected to focus on what the White House calls the blue-collar economic boom, lowering overall health care costs and safe, legal immigration. In a speech, sources tell Fox News will be both positive and optimistic. A tone in sharp contrast, perhaps, to a tweet sent overnight by the president shortly after midnight, in which he accused Democrats of using the impeachment process as a blazingly political process to damage the GOP and boost their chances, Chris, in 2020. Chris?
Kevin Corke reporting from Mar-a-Lago. Kevin, thank you. Earlier, I spoke.
And I think I pretty much pre-criticized that clip as to what the Fox News bias, the political partisan bias was, and also in terms of their bias. You saw all the. They spent so much time talking about the Super Bowl. Chris Wallace had this pre-recorded interview with the Fox News sports commentators. Like, what is that doing on a political show? I don't know. Maybe someone can explain to me why a 10 or 15 minute conversation about the NFL and who's a great quarterback and who's going to be the new holder of the title of greatest quarterback or best quarterback in the NFL versus the old people who used to be, and whatever. I can't even believe I had to watch all of that on Fox News Sunday this morning. How was that even news? I'm sorry. I'm not a big sports fan. I have, the only sport I ever really followed much was NBA basketball. I was a Lakers fan a little bit when I was growing up and got to go to a bunch of Lakers games back in the Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar era, and maybe a little bit of Kobe Bryant. I felt, last week a little bit of, I have mixed feelings about Kobe Bryant, but I didn't even talk about Kobe Bryant last week because it's sports, really, not news, and especially when there's such big news going on. Like I said, I can see how CBS News' Face the Nation decided that coronavirus was more important than Iowa and impeachment, but the Super Bowl more important than coronavirus or Iowa or impeachment. Seems like a ridiculous news choice to me, but you can... I'm doing this live stream during the actual Super Bowl where there's a tie game. So big excitement, big news. If that's, anyway, you can let me know if you think it's news or not news down in the comment section. And now I want to get to my newsmaker clips. I have 5 of them. It's Chuck Todd talking to Lamar Alexander, who was the one who basically broke the news to us that there weren't going to be any witnesses called in Trump's impeachment trial. For the first time in American history, we're going to have an impeachment trial in the Senate with no witnesses, and the one person is that you can thank for that is retiring Senator Lamar Alexander, whose explanation really makes very little sense. And I guess I have to give some credit to Chuck Todd for asking the questions that showed that his whole rationale for voting the way he voted really makes no sense. And instead of, criticizing his answer, let's watch it together, and I'll look at my notes here. If there's the clip list down in the video description where this is clip number 6 where, I explain why it is that I think that Lamar Alexander doesn't make sense. And one of the things I liked about the introduction to this clip is Chuck Todd mentions Dash. I'm going to show a Dash and Sandy clip at the end from my cat Dash and my dog Sandy, or a Dandy clip as people like to call it. Well, here you'll see that Lamar Alexander's vote dashed Democrats' hopes. Well, it's not really dash, it's just dashing Democrats' hopes in the clip I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Opening day of the campaign season and the Iowa caucuses. But if there's been any drama in President Trump's impeachment trial, and there hasn't been much, it came when Senator Lamar Alexander voted against hearing more witnesses. It dashed the Democrats' hopes of getting 4 Republicans to introduce more evidence and perhaps witnesses. In the end, only 2, Mitt Romney and Susan Collins, voted yes. I sat down yesterday morning with Senator Alexander for an exclusive interview, and I began by asking him why he voted the way he did.
Well, if you have 8 witnesses who say someone left the scene of an accident, why do you need 9? The question for me was, do I need more evidence to conclude that the president did what he did? And I concluded no. So I voted.
What do you believe he did? What do you believe he did?
What I believe he did, one, was that he call the president of Ukraine and ask him to become involved in investigating Joe Biden, who was
You believe his wrongdoing began there, not before? Not before?
I don't know about that, but he admitted that. The president admitted that. He released a transcript, he said on television. The second thing was, at least in part, he delayed the military and other assistance to Ukraine in order to encourage that investigation. Those are the two things he did. I think he shouldn't have done it. I think it was wrong. Inappropriate was the way I'd say, improper, crossing the line. And then the only question left is, who decides what to do about that?
Well, who decides what to do about that?
The people is my conclusion. You know, it struck me really for the first time early last week that we're not just being asked to remove the president from office. We're saying, tell him he can't run in the 2020 election, which begins Monday in Iowa.
If this weren't an election year, would you have had a different, would you have looked at this differently?
I would have looked at it differently, probably come to the same conclusion, because I don't think what he did, I think what he did is a long way from treason, bribery, high crimes and misdemeanors. I don't think it's the kind of inappropriate action that the framers would expect the Senate to substitute its judgment for the people in picking a president.
Does it wear on you, though, that one of the foundational reasons, ways that the framers wrote the Constitution was almost fear of foreign interference?
That's true.
So, and here it is.
Well, if you hooked up with Ukraine to wage war on the United States, as the first senator from Tennessee did, you could be expelled. But this wasn't that. This was the kind of, what the president should have done was, if he was upset about Joe Biden and his son and what they were doing in Ukraine, he should have called the Attorney General and told him that, and let the Attorney General handle it the way they always handle cases that involve public figures.
And why do you think he didn't do that?
Maybe he didn't know to do it.
This has been a rationale that I've heard from a lot of Republicans. Well, boy, he's still new to this.
Well, a lot of people come to watch.
At what point, though, is he no longer new to this?
Well, the bottom line is not an excuse. He shouldn't have done it. And I said he shouldn't have done it. And now I think it's up to the American people to say, okay, good economy, lower taxes, conservative judges, behavior that I might not like, call to Ukraine, weigh that against Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, and pick a president.
Are you at all concerned, though, when you seek foreign interference, he does not believe he's done anything wrong, that what has happened here might encourage him that he can continue to do this?
I don't think so. I hope not. I mean, enduring an impeachment is something that nobody should like. Even the president said he didn't want that on his resume. I don't blame him. So if a call like that gets you an impeachment, I would think you would think twice before you did it again.
What it is, what
And actually, Chuck Todd's next question there is like, when in Trump's life has he ever been chastened by anything? And that shows the ridiculousness of Lamar Alexander's last answer there, that he thinks that, oh, because Trump was impeached and the Senate covered up his crimes, he's never going to do this again. That's ridiculous. But one thing I thought that Lamar Alexander said that Chuck Todd didn't follow up on enough was the whole thing about how first Chuck Todd did follow up on when Lamar Alexander said that what he did wasn't enough for removal, but they proved what he did, but it wasn't enough for removal. And Chuck Todd did follow up on, well, what did he do? And what Lamar Alexander admitted that Trump did was, far less than what could have been proved by additional evidence. So I thought that was pretty ridiculous on Lamar Alexander's part. And then the whole idea that he's going to be deterred by the impeachment, but the cover-up by the Senate isn't going to embolden him. Anyway, Lamar Alexander is not going to have a great legacy from this impeachment. I don't think, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And the next clip I want to show is the best clip in terms of representing what I think about what happened this last week, based on, like I said, watching every single second of the impeachment trial. And this is the Adam Schiff clip answering a question from Margaret Brennan on CBS News's Face the Nation about, what did impeachment accomplish? And first he talks about how some Republican senators have admitted what you just saw Lamar Alexander admitting, that the House managers proved their case about what Trump did. But by the end of this clip, I think Adam Schiff explains what was the actual point of impeachment, which is the same thing you saw in the very first clip, I'm sorry, I'm being distracted by the snoring of Sandy just on the floor over to my left. But no, the Saturday Night Live cold open last night with Alec Baldwin and Beck Bennett as Mitch McConnell, where they satirized how Trump has shown that the Republicans in the Senate are forever tied to his wrongdoing for which he was impeached. Well, that's what Adam Schiff actually points out by the end of his answer with Margaret Brennan on CBS News's Face the Nation this morning, answering the question as to what was the point of the impeachment over in this clip.
Jerry Seib of the Wall Street Journal wrote, unlike past impeachment debates over Presidents Nixon and Clinton, this one uncovered little to no common ground between the two parties. What do you think this impeachment accomplished?
Well, what's remarkable is you now have Republican senators coming out and saying, yes, the House proved its case. The House proved the corrupt scheme that they charged in the articles of impeachment. The president did withhold hundreds of millions of dollars from an ally to try to coerce that ally into helping him cheat in the next election. That's pretty remarkable when you now have senators on both sides of the aisle admitting the House made its case. And the only question is, should the president be removed for office because he's been found guilty of these offenses? I think it's enormously important that the country understand exactly what this president did, and we have proved it. I also think it's important that the Senate take the next step. Having found him guilty, if indeed that's what they have found, they need to remove him from office because he is threatening to still cheat in the next election by soliciting foreign interference.
But the votes aren't there to remove the president from office. As you said, Senators Rubio, Alexander, Portman have all said in some way or another they found the actions of the president inappropriate, but not enough to oust him. So the bottom line here seems to be that the president will get away with what they're calling inappropriate. What are Democrats going to do? What do you do next?
Well, first of all, to call solicitation, coercion, blackmail of a foreign power, an ally at war by withholding military aid to get help in cheating the next election merely inappropriate doesn't begin to do justice to the gravity of this president's misconduct. Misconduct that I think undermined our national security as well as that of our ally and threatens the integrity of our elections. Now, if the senators still won't act, even though they know the truth now, even though they've acknowledged what the president did, look, I still think it's enormously important that the president was impeached because the country is moving away from its democratic ideals. And I think by standing up to this president, as we have, by making the case to the American people, by exposing his wrongdoing, we are helping to slow the momentum away from our democratic values. Until that progress away from democracy can be arrested and we can return to some sense of normalcy and support for the founders' ideal. But I'm not letting the senators off the hook. We're still going to go into the Senate this week and make the case why this president needs to be removed. It will be up to the senators to make that final judgment, and the senators will be held accountable for it.
But given where the numbers are.
And you saw Adam Schiff there make the point I was talking about before I showed the clip, that the Senate is going to be held accountable. That backs up the title of my video this week, Senate covers for Trump, that the decision by the Senate last week to call no witnesses for the first time in American history in a Senate impeachment trial, and then we're assuming on Wednesday that the Senate is going to not remove Trump or not even vote to find him guilty of the charges, and maybe even to acquit him. So Adam Schiff, I think, makes that important point that all the Republican senators who vote for any of those things have inexorably forever tied themselves to Trump's wrongdoing, just like you saw in the very first clip I showed, the cold open from Saturday Night Live last night, where Mitch McConnell is forever tied to Donald Trump and his bogus impeachment trial that involved no witnesses, no evidence, and certainly not Donald Trump admitting to all the things that Alec Baldwin as Donald Trump admitted to in the first clip I showed. But actually, when I was showing that clip, I remembered the one comment I forgot to make about the Lamar Alexander clip from NBC News' Meet the Press that also applies to the next clip I'm going to show of Jake Tapper talking to Joni Ernst, the Republican senator from Iowa. And this has to do with the idea that that maybe Trump didn't understand. Lamar Alexander said, well, Trump should have gone to the Department of Justice and asked them to investigate the Bidens so they could have contacted Ukraine, and he just didn't know enough about the way the U.S. government works to do that. That you saw Lamar Alexander say that, and Chuck Todd said, oh, well, that's been a stupid excuse for Republicans for a long time, that, he just doesn't know how to be president. He's still learning. But actually, what no one pointed out that I saw on the Sunday morning news analysis shows was that even if Trump had said to his Department of Justice, investigate the Bidens instead of asking the Ukraine to do it, that still would have been improper, because no one in the White House is supposed to ask the Department of Justice to investigate or do any specific investigation. I mean, the Department of Justice is part of the Article 2 executive, so the president can say, we should put more resources into, drug investigations or, corruption investigations, but not investigate Joe Biden, investigate my enemies. That was what Nixon did. And we're supposed to have the Department of Justice is supposed to open up criminal investigations if there is enough evidence, probable cause to, they're supposed to decide, independent of any sort of political motivations, to open an investigation based on the evidence, not based on the president saying, open an investigation because these are my political enemies. And Trump does it so often, we've kind of forgotten that, and it's a breaking of a political norm. It's, there's no law, but it's because that's how we keep the Justice Department independent from political influence from the White House. And It's kind of sad that Republicans in the Senate don't even seem to remember that. That's something that Lamar Alexander said in the clip I showed, and Joni Ernst said it in a later after the clip I'm about to show. This is where Joni Ernst tries to justify how, the whole dirt on the Bidens issue is something that's in the record now because Democrats referenced it so many times when they were talking about how Trump politicized his contact with the Ukrainian president, asking him to do political investigations in exchange for the White House meeting that still hasn't happened, and the military aid that Trump held up for. Anyway, you know what the wrongdoing is by Trump, and here's Joni Ernst trying to explain her support for Trump. Not very well, I don't think, and I will discuss talking to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union this morning, and I will discuss that with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
President's impeachment trial overlapping the Iowa caucuses. My next guest, Senator Joni Ernst, said last week that she was interested to see how one might influence the other. She pointed to criticism during the trial by the president's defense team of Joe and Hunter Biden.
Iowa caucuses are this next Monday evening, and I'm really interested to see how this discussion today informs and influences the Iowa caucus voters, those Democratic caucus goers. Will they be supporting Vice President Biden at this point?
Biden has seized on her remarks, saying that the senator revealed more than she meant to.
She spilled the beans. She just came out and flat said it. You know, the whole impeachment trial for Trump is just a political hit job to try to smear me because he is scared to death to run against me, and he has good reason to be concerned.
Joining me now, Iowa Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa. She served in the Army National Guard and retired as a lieutenant colonel, and she has a new opinion piece in the Des Moines Register taking on the Democratic presidential candidates ahead of the caucuses. Thanks so much for being here, Senator. We appreciate
thank you,
it. So former VP Biden's chief strategist, Mike Donilon, responded to your comment. He said, "We welcome your panicked admission of who you know would win this battle for the soul of our nation. Please keep it coming because this validation from you is the best we can get." Is Mike Donilon right? Are you focused on Biden because you think he poses the greatest threat to Trump?
No, I think that in that conversation we were having with reporters the other day, it was quite evident the House managers brought up Vice President Biden and his son Hunter and Burisma over 400 times in their opening 400 times in their opening argument.
The Democrats did that.
The Democrats did that. And then the president's White House counsel spent a number of hours laying out the situation with Burisma. So I was just pointing out that Iowa has very smart voters, very educated caucus goers, and if they're paying attention to all the dynamics with the candidates, that might be something that they would take into consideration.
The Republicans have been defending President Trump, saying his pressure campaign with Ukraine had nothing to do with electoral politics, had nothing to do with Biden's campaign. I'm wondering if you think that by linking them, you undermine that argument at all.
I don't think it undermined at all. I think that, again, what we've seen is the Democrats presenting their case. And I think it just really did show that there was something of concern with Burisma. And so I think that excuse me, the Democrats can follow that. They'll make that decision as they go to the caucuses tonight. But I do think overall there is a corruption issue in Ukraine. We have pointed this out for years. I know
not necessarily about the Bidens, you're saying.
Not
just in
necessarily.
general,
There's a corruption issue. In general, there is a corruption issue there. And of course, the president honed in on that. And took that issue on. But again, you know, we want to see how this influences our caucus goers tomorrow evening as they head out to their polling places.
But that does seem to undermine the argument that this wasn't about electoral politics, given that you're saying you want to see how the mention of Joe and Hunter Biden, and we should point out there is no evidence that anybody did anything illegal regarding the Bidens and Ukraine, and Joe Biden was carrying out U.S. policy. But it does seem to suggest that you think that this could have an effect.
I think this does. Whether, that was the intention or not, now everything is tied together. So the information about the Bidens is out there. And so now it is up to the American people to decide, was that a good choice for Hunter Biden to be on that board, especially at a time when his father was trying to ferret out corruption in Ukraine, having his son working for the most corrupt oligarch in Ukraine.
You voted against a motion to hear from new witnesses on Friday.
And like I said, down in the video description, there are links to the sources of all my clips, including CNN's State of the Union, where you can see the full Joni Ernst interview where she answers that next question from Jake Tapper. But the whole idea that nepotism is a cardinal sin that Joe Biden invented. I think of the children of powerful people are not going to be able to get cushy jobs that they don't really have the qualifications to get. Then there are many people in the U.S. Senate who are going to, and all throughout the American government, who are going to have to answer for that nepotism charge. And I mean, that's the thing. I am not a defender of Hunter Biden getting a $1 million a year job on the board of Burisma, but as a former criminal defense attorney, I can't think of any particular law that Hunter Biden violated, and I happen to know, based on many different news, real journalistic news coverages of this particular incident, that Joe Biden, when he fired the prosecutor who was supposedly investigating Burisma, that prosecutor he fired was actually corrupt, and that prosecutor had put the Burisma investigation on hold, so there was no way that holding up U.S. aid that to get that corrupt prosecutor fired was a personal partisan or a personal benefit to Joe Biden. It was actually U.S. policy that was agreed to by all of the Western European allies who are trying to fight corruption in the Ukraine, because the prosecutor that Biden got fired by supposedly threatening to withhold all these U.S. loan guarantees in the, Biden corruption tape that Trump keeps talking about, that was actually a corrupt prosecutor that all of the anti-corruption fighters wanted to get fired, and it had nothing to do with the nepotistic board membership of Hunter Biden on the Burisma board that, that does look kind of fishy, but isn't a legal violation, and like I said, had nothing to do with what Joe Biden did. So anyway, I just wanted to mention all of that as an antidote to the all the information that the Democrats mentioned about Burisma 400 times, talking about Biden and Burisma, but that was because that was the whole Trump scheme that Joni Ernst was amplifying in that last clip, and that is pretty swampy for a Republican Party that claims to be draining the swamp. But I have two more clips I want to show, one long one and one short one. The short one is Andrew Yang at the end talking about whether we should pardon the corrupt Trump administration officials who have perpetrated this whole fraud on and, this whole scheme to defraud the United States. Should they all be pardoned or investigated by the next administration? That's the final clip. But before I show that clip, I have a 5-minute clip of Alan Dershowitz on Fox News Sunday trying to explain his huge gaffe in the impeachment trial this week, where he said that if a president believes that his own election is in the national interest, then quid pro quos that include his own election aren't corrupt, which that is actually a legitimate summary of what he said, and you'll see him say it in this clip from Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. And then there's a Dick Durbin clip saying that, that means if anything that the president does in support of his own election is not impeachable, which isn't really what Alan Dershowitz said. And you'll see Alan Dershowitz try to capitalize on that straw man argument about, showing, the most exaggerated form of what he said. But his argument was ridiculous, and I will talk about the ridiculous of Alan Dershowitz's argument in the Senate trial, which I watched in full along with every other second of the Senate impeachment trial of Donald Trump, which I will use to comment on this 5-minute clip from Fox News Sunday where Chris Wallace, asks about the argument, but then all of his follow-ups don't really get to the heart of the matter, as I will talk about after we watch that clip together over here.
Created quite a controversy with something you said in the Senate trial. Here is what you said, and here's some of the blowback.
If a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment.
If you can identify something as president that's in your political interest and say that's the national interest, then all bets are off.
Here's what I don't understand. Right. You have made it clear, and you and I went at it last week on the question of, you say that to be an impeachable offense, it's got to be a crime.
Criminal-like behavior akin to treason and bribery. That's what the Constitution means when it says treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors.
So then why get into this question of whether or not the president thinks his re-election is in the public interest? Because you seem to be implying that somehow that gives him an extra level of immunity.
No, it doesn't. I was asked the question by a senator. The question was, does quid pro quo matter? And my answer is, it matters if what the president did is illegal or wrong. But if the president did something completely lawful, the fact that part of his motivation may have been to help his election cannot be the quid pro quo. That's what I said. I never said, I don't mean, and I don't believe that a president can do anything if he thinks in his national interest. Look, I supported the impeachment of Richard Nixon. He thought that the 5 crimes he committed were all in the national interest. These folks have totally distorted, quite deliberately, because they saw that I was having an impact on some of the senators. So they deliberately distorted what I said and said, oh, even if it's criminal, if the president thinks it's in the best interest, it can't be an impeachable offense. Nonsense. I never said it. The Wall Street Journal says I never said it. The New York Times says I never said it. And the fact that Schumer and Schiff and CNN say I said it doesn't make it true.
But again, I don't even know why intent is an issue and why you got into it.
Because I was asked.
No, but my point is, the activity is what you say is the key. If it's criminal or criminal-like activity, then it can be impeachable. If it's not criminal activity, it doesn't matter what the motive is.
Well, the example I gave, I said there are 3 levels of motive. The example I gave is a president says, I'm not giving you your money, Ukraine, unless you give me $1 million kickback. Of course that's criminal.
Right.
And of course he goes to jail. Abraham Lincoln sent the troops home to Indiana to vote for Republicans in the election. Was that impeachable? No. Because
but it wouldn't matter what his motive was.
Well, it doesn't matter to me, but it matters to Schiff and it matters to the people on the other side. They were focusing on motive. I was responding to them. I didn't put that in my original speech because you're right. It's not relevant to my argument. But I was on the floor to respond to constitutional arguments. I was asked that question, and then it was deliberately wrenched out of context.
You seem pretty upset about it.
I was very upset about that because It has hurt me. People think I actually believe a president like Nixon can do anything he wants. It's exactly the opposite of what I've been teaching, arguing, and as a civil libertarian believing in for 50 years. How dare they deliberately and willfully distort my position and then not give me an opportunity to respond?
All right, forget impeachment for a moment. I'm asking you this, and maybe you'll agree to do it or not, but a thought experiment.
Sure.
Alan Dershowitz, citizen. Do you find it troubling, problematic that a president would link in any way, forget his motive, and I'm not saying it's criminal, his support for an ally and even military aid for an ally to investigating his political opponent?
And on Election Day, as a citizen, I will allow that to enter into my decision who to vote for. But it's not an impeachable offense. And I was there to argue a constitutional issue, not to tell people who to vote for president. I'm a liberal Democrat.
So, are you going to tell me whether or not you find it troubling?
Of course, any citizen would find that troubling if it were proved. Yes, that would be troubling. Troubling is not the criteria for impeachment.
I am not asking you about
impeachment.
According
to Schiff, unless you do the right thing, you're impeachable. And doing something troubling is impeachable. That's not what the framers said.
So you do think that linking aid to an ally for your investigating your political opponents?
If a president linked aid to an ally to personal benefit that was not in the public interest, that would be wrong. That would be a reason for me not to vote for him.
And when you say in the public interest, does the fact that it might help his reelection, does that make it?
No, that wouldn't qualify as the public interest. The fact that it would help eliminate corruption in the Ukraine, a country which I have been to. I represented the former president of Ukraine. I know a lot about corruption in the Ukraine. The fact that...
But you seem to be saying right here, Professor, that what Donald Trump did was wrong and troubling, but it wasn't impeachable.
No, what you said is if a president did it solely for his own interest, would it be?
I never used the word solely.
Okay, but I'm using it.
That was kind of ridiculous, that last part there where he said, well, you claim solely, and Chris Wallace pointed out, well, I never said solely. Well, I'm using it. That was like, it reminded me of the clip I showed a couple weeks ago where Dershowitz contradicted himself within 30 seconds on whether what Benjamin Curtis said back in 1868 was binding or persuasive. And he said, I never said binding, like within 30 seconds of when he said binding. And then you saw there he said, you said solely. I never said solely. Well, I'm saying solely. It's like, I mean, Dershowitz, what is he, like 81 years old at this point? So I guess you have to give him a little leeway, but then he shouldn't be arguing. If you need to give him leeway, he shouldn't be arguing in Trump's impeachment trial. And I saw in the live comments while I was doing while I was showing that clip this this comment. Sandy Trunks and Tom Trask arguing about me naming. I did say I had a cat in law school who and there's the cat. I have both Dash and Sandy here, but I had a cat in law school who actually died when I was a public defender, named Dershowitz. Because I went to law school and became a public defender in part because of a book by Alan Dershowitz, Best Defense, about why the criminal defense and especially indigent criminal defense was really important, and based on, of course, the U.S. Constitution. I always have my Constitution here handy, and so I have been really disappointed by Alan Dershowitz and his support of Donald Trump. He claims to still be a liberal Democrat, yet making these specious arguments in support of Donald Trump that even Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday pretty much pointed out the ridiculousness of what just because Dick Durbin made a somewhat straw man argument that Alan Dershowitz said that, as long as Trump has a public interest motive to get himself reelected, he can do anything. That's not what Alan Dershowitz said, but he did say that getting yourself reelected is enough of a political interest motive that it means you can't be impeached for investigating your political opponent to get dirt against or asking for a bogus political investigation against your political opponent. That's actually something of value. And even if there's some Supreme Court precedent that says it's difficult to say that Oppo research is something of value in terms of a violation of the law for accepting something of value from a foreign citizen in a federal election, that's a crime. There's a link down in the video description that shows why accepting contributions from foreign nationals in a federal political campaign is a crime. And maybe it's difficult to prove that opposition research is something of value in, a federal criminal case, but in terms of impeachment for something that's criminal-like, as Alan Dershowitz says, if it's criminal-like, it's impeachable. Well, accepting foreign opposition research, I think, is something of value in terms of being bribery, soliciting bribery as something that is criminal-like and impeachable, and that is one of the big flaws in Alan Dershowitz's argument. But before I finish the show, I have one more newsmaker clip. This is Andrew Yang, who I fear this may be his last big moment, but if he doesn't get over 15% in the Iowa caucuses, and that he spent all this time in Iowa, and that was one of the subjects that George Stephanopoulos asked him about. You can see the whole Andrew Yang interview by clicking on the This Week with George Stephanopoulos link down in the video description. But here's Andrew Yang repeating something I showed him talking about weeks ago that I thought was something not very good from Andrew Yang, about how if he were President Andrew Yang, after all of this wrongdoing in the Trump administration, he would actually pardon all the wrongdoing rather than engage in what, third world banana republics do, which is, jailing the former regime for bogus wrongdoing. But if there's actual wrongdoing, it should be investigated. That was one of the things that I was really disappointed with Obama about, that they never investigated torture. And, I follow Carol Rosenberg on Twitter, who covers all the Guantanamo trials, and that's still an issue. The torturers have been testifying recently at Guantanamo in the Guantanamo trials, and I wish there had been accountability for the torturers, so they would actually be held criminally accountable for engaging in torture rather than testifying for the prosecution at Guantanamo recently. But that's why I don't agree with what Andrew Yang says in the final news clip I'm going to show you over here.
New Hampshire, let me ask you a question coming out of impeachment. One of your competitors, Elizabeth Warren, has said that if she's elected president, she's going to appoint a task force to investigate President Trump's wrongdoing if she's elected. You've suggested, though, that a President Yang might pardon President Trump. Why?
Well, you have to see what the facts on the ground are, and certainly I'd listen to the guidance of my attorney general. But if you look, George, at history around the world, it's a very, very nasty pattern that developing countries have fallen into, where a new president ends up throwing the president before them in jail. And that pattern, unfortunately, makes it very hard for any party to govern sustainably moving forward with a sense of unity among their people. And so to me, America should try to avoid that pattern if at all possible.
Let me ask you a final question. You have been one of the most improbable.
So that's the final news clip. I think I pretty much pre-criticized what Andrew Yang said there in terms of keeping people accountable. I do agree that you shouldn't be prosecuting the former regime just because they're your political opponents. That's the mistake that Trump made asking for the Biden investigations, and Ukraine understood that. There's this piece of information that came out during the House investigation where I think it was Andrew Yermak, is that the counselor to Vladimir Zelenskiy, the president of Ukraine, who said when they were told not to do investigations of their political rivals, like you're asking us to do about the Bidens and the Clintons, talking about Burisma and Crowdstrike, the ridiculous conspiracies that Trump was trying to get Ukraine to investigate. But anyway, that's my final news clip, and I do want to show you a Dash and Sandy clip as promised, a dandy clip as it were. This was, I think this clip shows that sometimes when I can't get actual activity by Dash and Sandy or Sandy and Dash, I just move the camera to create that activity, as you'll see earlier today in this clip. And that's the show. Thanks for joining me during the Super Bowl. For the non-sports fans out there, Sandy's right here next to me. I don't know where Dash went. He came by at one point, but anyway, I will be back next Sunday where we'll find out what happens in the Iowa caucuses. We'll find out where, it could be so many people, but I talked earlier about my preferences. We'll find out whether Trump can actually give a good speech at the State of the Union when his impeachment exoneration is still up in the air, or maybe he'll freak out and start I don't know what Trump might do. That's one of the things that might happen on Tuesday, and then Wednesday we'll find out, will the Senate actually quit him, as everyone says is almost certain. And I'll be reporting all of that next Sunday, and I'll be back every Sunday at least for the rest of 2020. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.